So welcome to our business webinar program presented by Bank of America. Today's session is Put Your Brand to Work, and we will learn the elements of brands besides visual identity like logos, how to develop brand values that really connect to your audience, and how to leverage that brand to gain super fans who become repeat customers. I'm Desiree Brown, Senior Manager of Digital Content and Education for the Tory Burch Foundation, and I am so excited to be here with our incredible speaker today, Robyn Young. Robyn is a brand and creative strategist and is also the founder of Young & Co. Her expertise is in creating sticky brand building for companies and individuals. So we are going to be in great hands today. And just a reminder that after Robyn's presentation, we will have plenty of time for Q&A. So please be sure to ask your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can. And let's reserve the chat for that community building, exchanging information, all of that great stuff. Again, we encourage you to take notes today, but today's session will be recorded. So please watch your inboxes for the replay link. And a reminder that all of our sessions are available on our YouTube channel and on torybirchfoundation.org. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Robyn.
Awesome. Okay. Here we go. Alrighty. So in this webinar, as hopefully we're all in the right place, looking for the right content, we're going to be discussing how to leverage your brand beyond a visual identity to pull in that audience of super fans. Or in other words, how do you establish a strong point of view that gives you positioning power over your competitors, even in cases where you cannot outspend them? Here we go. Oops, jumping already ahead already. Here we go. First, let me just say thank you for being here. I know that time is of the essence, and the fact that you've come here to enjoy this with us today, I should say, means a lot to me. My goal is to provide value for you and to show you an unconventional way to think about your brand. So yes, please be active in the chat, ask questions. We'll try to get to as many of them, address them as we go. So first, a little bit about me, the speaker today. I cut my teeth early on in market research, starting 18, 20 years ago, something like that. I worked for Gallup and Robinson with clients such as Nike, Target, and Robbins Brothers doing market research in retail environments. From then on, I spent time at UCLA in actual creative execution. I was a senior copywriter. I have also spent time facilitating workshops for the likes of Google and disrupting education at General Assembly before starting my creative partnership, Young & Co., which has now been going on 8 years. So during my time at my company, I have helped to launch or relaunch over 75 brands across industries and categories. So to say that branding is a passion of mine is a little bit of underplaying it. I'm also now working on a book, which I'll talk about later, that's about building whole brand ecosystems, specifically for visionaries. I love working with brands that are about creating legacy within their industry rather than just creating successful businesses. Often the two go hand in hand, though. So we'll talk about how to do that more today. Okay, so before we get into it, this is the place I have to start with. Virtually every single workshop that I teach, that I create, is a deeper understanding of what a brand is and what a brand isn't. So for some of you, this may be review, and I apologize if it is. However, there are still many people who go around thinking that brand is their logo or their name or their slogan or their fonts or the look and feel of their Instagram feed rather. So these are actually just expressions of your brand. In fact, we call them branding. Yes. So what then is a brand? Well, this is one of my favorite authors. He's sort of the godfather of brand strategy. His name is Marty Neumeier. He's written a number of strategy-centric books, The Brand Gap being one of the main ones. And he says that a brand is a person's gut feeling about a product, service, or organization. Now, what can be a little bit uncomfortable about this is that your brand isn't completely 100% within your control. You've probably heard it's not what you say it is, it's what they say it is. This is also why PR crisis exists, right? So that doesn't though mean that you as maybe the founder or the CMO or team member is completely powerless in how your brand will be received by your customers. Okay, there are some aspects that are within your control. So a brand strategy being one of the main ones, it functions like a compass, right? And it's not like a roadmap. I think a lot of times when people hear strategy, we tend to think of, war. Strategy within a war, it tends to be like your roadmap, your plan of action. I want you to actually think of strategy as more like a compass. Yes, it helps guide you on where your brand should and shouldn't play. It gives you a sort of North Star for direction, right? So you'll often hear me refer to brand strategy as your brand point of view throughout this webinar. They are essentially the same thing. For me, brand point of view is just a much clearer representation for what we're actually trying to accomplish. Okay, so your brand tends to get grouped under marketing a lot. And I think that's because traditionally it was seen as a function of external communications. However, it's not, right? Brand should actually sit at the center of your business universe because it informs everything that you do, from who you hire to, yes, your tangible expressions, your visual identity, your verbal or vocal identity, but also your products. Those are representations of your brand. They're almost like gifts with purchase or tokens to a bigger experience, right? The entirety of your customer journey is part of your brand as well. So this is how I want you to start thinking about brand, less just in terms of branding, visual identity, the way that we're used to thinking about brand, and really encapsulating a lot of these different ways to amplify it. So by the way, this is the book that I'm writing on this very topic, which is called Build Your Brand Universe. And it's about how to build a more cohesive ecosystem around your brand point of view. So it goes through the many steps and frameworks used for brand building. Now, I will say this, I'm a big believer that formulas don't work, right? I believe in frameworks. I think that there's best practices. You don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel every time. But if you want to copy paste somebody's strategy, it rarely works that way. Brand is not a science, it's an art. Right? So the best that we can hope to do is to form that strong brand point of view, something that really resonates with your core audience, and then find the right ways to amplify it. By the way, I'll be dropping a link, or the team will be dropping a link to sign up for my book, for the waitlist for my book, if any are interested in that. Okay, so I did promise that I would talk about the only two components you really need to know when brand building. Are you ready for them? Here they are. We've been obsessing over brand for the longest time, but these are the most important ones that you need to know about. First, having a distinct point of view, right? I don't say product difference here, notice. Certainly a product difference helps, but what's funny is that it's actually not essential. Having a distinct point of view, though, with your brand is essential. Right? It gives you something to talk about, something different than what already exists. And number two is how well you amplify that point of view in everything that you do. Now, without the brand point of view, there is nothing to amplify. That's where most founders get stuck because they start focusing more on tactics within each one of these areas rather than basing their decisions around what actually makes sense for the brand point of view. That's where you start getting lost into, subjectivity, trends, platform best practices, or somebody's proven techniques, right? There isn't the connective tissue between what you actually need, what those elements are that are going to help you shape perception of your brand. So we'll come back to this, but first, I want to introduce you to somebody. Classic brand builder. I have to create some characters in my in my presentation here. So this is Tim. I hope you'll forgive the crude stick figure drawings here, but I wanted to quickly give you a very simple representation of sort of building a customer relationship, a connection with your customer base. So poor Tim is living that hustle life as a founder. He's trying to climb the customer affinity hill, right? So you start at awareness. At some point, hopefully you get to some kind of connection. Then you're taking them through engagement, delight even, until you hit the holy grail of brand loyalty. This is a very steep climb. It doesn't happen very quickly. It happens over years, decades even in some cases. So poor Tim is trying to climb this hill, but getting noticed feels like pushing a boulder uphill for him. He's struggling to get past this awareness phase. And it's because he's selling his process, his features, the specific pain points in his marketing. But it sounds like everybody else in his industry. And he knows that he's offering something better, but he's not getting any of the love that his competitors are. Now, if this is sounding familiar to you, I want you to drop a 1 in the chat right now. If this is resonating for you, give me a 1 in the chat. I want to see how much folks are resonating with this. So why is it so hard? Why is it just so difficult? There's several reasons. On top of just the day-to-day of running a business, brand building still feels to many founders like it's this esoteric thing that's outside of your control, but it's actually not. In most cases, it's just that you are focused on activating the brand before you've actually established what your unique point of view is going to be. Also, it's competitive out there, right? When you're the newcomer, it can feel like the deck is stacked against you, especially if you're a small operation. If your competitors are outspending you 10 to 1, it's gonna feel like, again, like it feels for Tim, like pushing a boulder uphill. You're not just competing with other brands in your category anymore. You're competing with everything that's vying for your customers or your audience's attention. So most of the founders I meet are throwing spaghetti on the wall without identifying what their distinct point of view even is. That means they're focused on tactics like creating viral videos or generating spammy email funnels or chasing CPC like it's a drug. And listen, I'm not saying that performance marketing isn't great for driving trial early, because it is, it's important. I'm certainly not suggesting removing that. But the problem is it becomes like a drug. You get so caught up in the short term that you're ignoring brand building. You're ignoring the long term. Maybe you feel like you're competing with algorithms, which seem to change almost daily. You're stuck in the pay to play of meta ads. You're considering working with influencers, but they are ever more expensive. I know, because I worked with influencers before as a brand manager. Endless networking, especially for all of you service providers out there. I know the struggle, feeling like you have to attend so many events per week, per month, just to move the needle for yourself, right? Or for you startups out there, pitch deck revisions over pitch deck revisions. Again, coming back to this idea that brand is somehow this esoteric thing that you just don't completely have control over. And while I admit that it's an art form, not a perfect science, again, I think where most founders really get this wrong is that they don't start with something with a solid foundation. So rather than creating traction for their brand, they're focused on tactics. What is the difference? Well, one involves strategy with a clear positioning, and the other is a hamster wheel, a lot of effort with little forward progress. There's a better way, thank God, right? So let's talk about Kim. Kim sees the struggle, and she knows that she can't outspend Tim, right? Or the others in her category. So what does she do? She's going to do something a little differently. Kim is going to leverage her brand to get ahead. It's not that she's not marketing, but she's beginning from a stronger foundation by using a bold brand position that drives awareness and connection at the same time, which is allowing her to cut through some of that early work to get noticed. How is Kim doing it? Oh, give us the secret sauce, Robyn. She's doing it by inverting the curve. Okay, so this is where the vast majority of businesses live, right here in the middle, in Switzerland territory, very PC, very demure, right? Not slinging platitudes, right? That's not going to cut through the noise. That's not going to cut through the chatter. Sure, nobody can argue with your product features and attributes, but there's also nothing really there for them to pay attention to and to get rallied behind. So brands that end up selling a lot of, selling on their product features and attributes a lot, they use words like delicious and clean and innovative and sustainable because they think that those are brand characteristics. They think that by doing that, they're establishing a point of view. Unfortunately, those are what I like to call fat words, right? They don't really mean a lot because they've become so watered down. They aren't really a strong or bold point of view anymore. So yes, if they're spending enough money, they're going to get some traction. And nobody really hates their brand, but nobody really loves it either, right? They become slaves to the pay-to-play model. And customers end up becoming indifferent towards them. They might like the product, but they're not married to the brand. So the brand curve actually inverts the normal purchase dynamics. And it does that by starting out dividing the world with a bold point of view in order to give those brands positioning power. It focuses on the bigger idea that sits above your product features and benefits. And it becomes the identifier that separates you from the others in your category. So the more bold and different your point of view is, yeah, it's going to be more polarizing, right? But first of all, we'll come back to that polarizing point. But first of all, many of you might be thinking, maybe I already have a strong point of view. How do I know? Well, ask, would anyone disagree? Would anyone disagree with you, right? Because if not, then what you have is a platitude, right? It's not a bold brand point of view. The whole point of a point of view is that two different people could see it differently. And yes, that's uncomfortable because it will mean that people will come in with their opinions and disagree with you. But if you are firm in your integrity about your brand's point of view, then you should be able to navigate that. Oh my goodness, but won't we alienate people? Well, yes, Tim, yes, you will. And that's kind of the point. Playing it safe is just about the most dangerous thing that you can do as a brand. And it's not going to help you cut through that noise. We've seen plenty of examples of that. So I'm going to give you a few well-known brands that have used this strategy really well. Probably not surprising to you in the audience, I'm going to start with one of the best in modern times, which is Liquid Death, right? I love this quote from Mike Cesario, who is the founder of Liquid Death. We knew we couldn't own an ingredient. That's why with Liquid Death, we always focused on brand. I've tried this product and yes, it's fine. I mean, it's water. There's nothing inherently different about it. Could he have spent his marketing dollars discussing why metal is infinitely recyclable? Yes, he could have. However, I think he also knew that there was nothing ownable about that. And so they, at the very beginning, established their entire brand around death to plastic, right? It quite virtually is a brand that leans into metal, from the heavy metal music to the audacious attitude they have. And I tell you what, not everybody loves this brand. It really divides the room. If you want to see just how much it divides the room, bring it up at a party and see people's response. Here's another brand, a relative challenger in the baby category that recently came out with a product line for solving moms' postpartum problems. Now, what was interesting about Frida is that they came up with this campaign, And originally it was supposed to run during the Oscars. The ad actually ended up getting rejected from Playtime. So what did they do? Well, I tell you what, a normal brand might have just taken the opportunity as taken this as a missed opportunity, changed the ad and gone with something that was, maybe a little bit more something that would be able to have that airtime. However, what Frida did was they added the rejection to the ad's opening copy and they released it on YouTube anyways. So I'm going to play this for you so you can see. A note, just there's nothing wrong with your audio. At the start, you won't hear any music or noise or anything, and then the ad will play. Just a heads up. Brilliant. Oatly is another great example. This is a challenger brand that has positioned themselves as the global lifestyle of vegan and vegetarianism. Now, they could just talk about that in their ads and their campaigns. However, in this particular example, they're actually calling out their industry. They're picking a fight with the milk industry to compare climate footprint numbers, emphasizing that brand's dedication to sustainable practices, not just a better milk substitute. Right? So this is an opportunity to recognize the way in which brands take a point of view or a stance, whether it's on the society at large or with direct competitors or within their industry. Here's an example of a brand that is fighting a direct competitors, right? So they came out with this revolutionary Better For You cola product that actually has probiotics and fiber that support digestive health. Now, rather than just talking about those benefits, they called out their monster, i.e. the market leaders who are slinging this zero sugar, low calorie options that are made of artificial flavors and colors and preservatives, right? And they're talking about how this is not okay. They're inviting customers to ditch the zero and embrace something that's truly healthy for them, right? This can also be done at a campaign level. So e.l.f. is a beauty company, right? It's what one might wonder, what do boardrooms that have a number of men that are named Richard, Rich, or Rick, what does that have? What does that have to do with beauty? Well, again, it's about projecting a strong point of view that makes a point about what's lacking within the industry. And what's interesting about e.l.f. is the way that they took an insight about the lack of diversity at boards and established a point of view about their brand. So it turns out that there are more men named Dick on corporate boards than entire groups of underrepresented people. But e.l.f.'s board is made up of almost entirely women. Before we move on, I want to give one more example, which is for those of you who might be familiar with it, this brand called Pepper, right? They talk about no cup gaps, right? So in Pepper's case, they're actually coming up with or making up a monster right? Rather than just talking about single pain points. That's another route in which you can go, one that we won't necessarily address today, but I just wanted to give you one more example of how you could come up with a kind of monster to fight that doesn't even necessarily have to call out anything within your industry. Now, some of you, I did see in the chat that some of you are small business owners, and you might be thinking to yourself, I can't afford to alienate people, right? To which I say, pishikaka. You cannot afford not to do this, right? So I want to show you some examples of brands that are relatively small compared to the rest of their industry and are still using this strategy. So Righteous Babes was started by an artist named Ani DeFranco. And because she was increasingly frustrated with the constraints of traditional labels, she wanted more autonomy. She hated the idea of one conglomerate in the industry that put profits over people. That was her brand point of view. So her company is a wildly successful small giant. And that means that they keep both their team and their talent roster at a level that will allow them to manage a small team so that they don't inevitably become the very thing that they're fighting against. Annie has cemented her reputation as an independent, fearless artist and trailblazing activist at this point. She is now making a documentary about her experience doing this as well. So while Taylor Swift maybe popularized it, people like Annie were laying the foundation for artists long before then. Here's another example. This is actually a client that we worked on. They're called Henson Shaving. They're a Canadian-based family-owned machine shop. And they initially started out creating parts for Mars rover and low-orbit satellites. They just happened to stumble upon a better design for a razor. So what was interesting is when we started working with them, this is what a lot of their ads looked like, talking about product features, the thin, blade size and things of that nature. Once we worked with them on strategy, we were able to establish a bigger point of view, a bigger fight about their industry. And it turned out that the shaving industry was somewhat broken. All of the innovation was happening on the business model side. Very little innovation was actually happening within the product side, right? So what we ended up doing was we came up with a campaign idea for them called gaslighting. And it was all about how the industry is gaslighting its customers to believe that we're actually the problem because nicks and bumps are normal. And maybe you need more shaving cream, or maybe you need to shave against the grain. Maybe you need to shave with the grain, right? It's this idea that stemmed from understanding what was lacking within their industry. So I just wanted to show you an example of how that can actually impact at a campaign level, or even here's a landing page that obviously furthered that idea of what are we being told within the industry, and how can we as a brand start fighting against that. Okay, so we're going to start with our first part of our exercise called pick a fight. I want you to pick a single one of these options, right? So first is either a competitor, could be a direct or an indirect competitor. And I want you to think about who or what are you standing against? How can you form a positioning around what you're standing against? So a good example of this is the Olipop, the Coke versus, the Coke and Pepsi Zero, the way that they're taking on those market leaders to form their brand point of view. That's one example. An aspect of your category is another example. What's lacking in the entire category that you want to fight against? What's a convention that you can break, right? So Oatly taking on the dairy industry's lack of sustainable practices is another perfect example of that. Or is there something within the cultural or societal category that you want to fight? Is there a bigger idea that affects multiple categories, not just yours, that you can form a belief around? So an example of this would be Liquid Death, the way that they took on plastic. Now, I'll come back to this in a second, but I wanted to invite my lovely assistant, Anawa, who's going to illustrate for us how this example worked, how she went through and came up with what was lacking in her category. This is an actual Tory Burch Foundation member, so I wanted to give you an example of this actually being done in real time. Go ahead, Anawa.
Thank you so much, Robyn. Hi, everyone. My name is Anawa Haynes, CEO and founder of Hojonago Consulting. We provide grant support services by way of grant research, writing, and grant management exclusively for tribes and Native-led nonprofits. So the aspect of what's lacking in the category is what I really focused on. And some of the, kind of top line issues that I was identifying, the grant process, and many of you as small business owners, or, maybe you've worked in the nonprofit industry, that the grant process is unduly burdensome and it's confusing to access grant funding in all of the ways, finding the grants, writing the grants, and then therefore managing the grants. And with respect to tribal communities, we face such high rates of poverty and lack of access to basic needs, running water, just basic infrastructure. 30% of the Navajo Nation lacks running water in their homes. So what we're up against and what's lacking in this category is we're really up against gatekeepers. There are key funding and resource allocation decisions that are being made by individuals or institutions who are so far removed from the challenges that are faced by marginalized communities, not just within tribal communities, but that is the specific demographic that we serve.
Perfect, thank you. So this is just part one of this exercise. I want you to make a list of what exactly about either a direct or indirect competitor, an aspect of your category, or a cultural societal issue that you want to fight against that could become the point of view or bigger idea around your brand. For now, just start making a list of all the things that piss you off about one of these categories. And I promise you that will start giving you some fresh territory to start figuring out what your brand point of view can be around. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do this exercise. Just don't overthink it. Start making a list just like Anawa showed us here, and we'll talk about step 2. So you have 3 minutes from now. Okay, I know that we have a question in here about somebody is stuck on the cultural societal example. So the idea here is that you want to pick something that is not just specific to your category. So it could be a bigger idea, something that affects more people than just within your category, right? So it could be, I mean, there's a number of different things. One might argue that the pepper example is almost more of a cultural or societal issue. Now, from my mind, I'm looking at it as that's more of a pain point, a single pain point that they turned into a monster. But you could kind of see it as both ways, right? So the idea is that you're picking something that is a little bit broader than just a lack within the category. Hopefully that helps or makes sense. Okay, about 30 more seconds. Is aspect of category stronger than competitor? Yes, it is. In most cases, what you want to do, obviously in Olipop's case, it makes sense within their category because Coke and Pepsi have had such a stronghold over the industry for them to call out the direct competitors. In my mind, I think that aspect of the category gives you more longevity. So especially if you're trying to fight a direct or indirect competitor that isn't as well known within the industry, it's much more productive for you to figure out what is that competitor doing that you see other competitors doing as well, which then ladders it up to an aspect of the category. Great question. Okay, we're going to move on. So now on the second part of this exercise, you're going to start to form a belief statement using one or more of the items from your list. So now the first thing to do is look for the patterns. Are there certain things that you could actually group together to come up with a focal point of what you're fighting? Can you turn that into a monster? Don't force it, but see if there's a way for you to describe a number of the different things on your list. So I'm giving you some examples of this. In a world of unhealthy soda companies compromising your health for Olipop, we believe you should ditch the zero and embrace something that's truly good for you. In the case of Righteous Babes, in a world of behemoth record labels putting profits over people, we believe artists should be able to create the art that they want to create, when and how they want to create it. And for Henson Shaving, our customer that does the razor blades, in a world of greedy razor companies more concerned with business models than actual innovations, we believe that products should be built to last, and product design should focus on what's good for the customer. Okay, so I want to go back to our lovely assistant, Anawa, and show you how she did this second part for her company. Go ahead, Anawa.
Thank you. So what I identified is that this is top-down decision-making versus community-led solutions. So my statement is, in a world where wealthy philanthropists act as gatekeepers determining where critical funding flows, we believe that those with greatest need should have the power to direct those resources where they will have the most meaningful impact.
Awesome. Thank you. And for this, I mean, you can see how this will actually become part of the way that Anawa can start to talk about the bigger idea and maybe even the bigger mission behind her brand. So it's almost an invitation for others in her category to share that point of view, which is another positioning tactic because it makes you feel like you're ahead of the group. Okay, so we're going to do the second part now. Again, you'll get 3 minutes. Don't overthink it. Of course, you can always, refine it later, but I want you to come up with a belief statement. Start your statement in a world of, right? Try to give some context behind who your monster is. And then the second part of the statement, what do you believe in the face of that monster? All right, 3 minutes, go now. I love this comment here. Nicely done. Will alienate some donors, but attract new ones. Yes. Again, the idea is that's kind of the point. You want to repel people who are not a fit, who don't share your point of view, so that you can attract more of the people who do share your point of view. Thank you, Amber. we're a big fan of this. This is, by the way, while we're all working on this, this is, by the way, just one framework, a single framework that we use in about an 8-step larger program when we're developing out a brand point of view. This is one of the, I think, best ways to start to form that brand point of view. That's why I wanted to share it with you all today. A couple minutes left. Yes, Velvet, exactly. Embracing the idea of not being a brand for all people. One of my favorite quotes, a brand for everyone is a brand for no one. It's something that I constantly have to keep in mind when we're working with clients. Okay, one more minute. I'll also remind you that the idea today is say it straight before you say it great. You're not trying to create some kind of highfalutin mission statement here. You're probably going to be the only one actually reading this. So the idea is be clear first before you start trying to get creative. Okay. So any questions, comments? We'll come back to this because I know we'll have a Q&A portion, but first I wanted to leave you with the most important thing that I hope you'll take away from today, which is if you cannot outspend your competition, unless many of you have truly, truly innovative products, you're going to have competition and there's going to be market leaders already in them. If you cannot outspend them, you have to outbrand them. Right? And if you would like more of this information, these are the various ways to keep in touch with me. Follow me. I'm on all the things, all the social channels. I'm probably the most active on LinkedIn and TikTok. I have tons of free content on TikTok. Please, by all means, go find me on there. You can subscribe to both my newsletter and our podcast. My newsletter is called Yes And. It is a improv themed newsletter that I write monthly. Funny and also very informative. I have a podcast where I interview entrepreneurs on not only their founder journeys, but also what they have managed to get through in the trenches of brand building. Again, I mentioned my waitlist for my book, which is called Build Your Brand Universe. That'll be out later this year. You're welcome to sign up for that. And if you're like, whoa, 911, I need you today, Robyn, how do we work together? This is my email address. Please, by all means, feel free to get in touch with me. Okay. Questions, comments? Loved it, hated it. I'll take it all.
Thank you, Robyn. We have tons of questions, but
Lovely.
first I want to start with thank you for your amazing exercise. It seems to really resonate with our community. And if people want to try this again, who do you suggest they do this with on their team?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think that this is really something that that can be done with multiple team members, whether you have, one person you're working with or 25. This is something that what I would recommend you do is do it all separately first and then come back and share notes. There's a lot that you can learn, whether somebody's been with your company for a long time or a week, right? Sometimes what we believe at Young & Co is that a beginner's mindset actually gives you fresh territory. They haven't been so ingrained in your company that they, are gotten stuck in what, they expect, or what, or what's already been said about your business for a long time. So I encourage you to do this both with new and old members. See what comes up, compare answers, and see if that gets you any closer to your belief statement.
That's so helpful. Being able to approach problems in new ways and from new perspectives can really give you great answers. Okay, so we have many people who are at the beginning of their journeys joining us. And, a big question is, what do you do if you have very little or maybe no budget? What should be your first step when it comes to branding?
Great question. Honestly, I love this question because startups are my jam. I have mostly worked with startups in my experience. Now, I know that term is very gray because it can mean two guys in a garage with a literal shoestring budget. I've worked with some of those. Or it can mean a global enterprise that just isn't profitable yet, and thus still a startup or scale up, right? So I know it's a very vague term. What I will say to you is this: never let your ambition be outstripped by your budget, right? By your resources. I think the most important thing to do is, first of all, figure out what this point of view is. Digest books if you must. If you can't work with a strategist, believe me, I get it. I started with $45 building Young & Co in the beginning. So believe me when I say I understand the struggle that is bootstrapping. You have to then be willing to put in the work, to invest the time, right? And at some point, your time will become more less plentiful than the resources, the money, right? And then it makes sense to bring somebody on who can provide that outside perspective. But at the start, at the jump, I would digest anything by Marty Neumeier. Certainly get my book. Follow me. I give so much free content out to startup founders on my channels. So that's what I would recommend if you're just starting out. The other thing I will say is, at the beginning, you may need to do some in-house handmade kind of brand building work. Like you might need to develop out an MVB, a minimum viable brand, just to test out and get some feedback back. Right. And that's okay. Know that it's okay to do that before you go and build an entire universe. Right. The other thing I'd recommend is only build what you need when you need it. You don't need to be on every single social channel within your first year. Build what you need when you need it. What's better is to have less channels, but to make them really rich, really meaty.
Absolutely. And this is something that we stress to founders that we speak to all the time. Just kind of do what you can and where it makes the most sense.
Yes, exactly.
So our next question is sort of the opposite. Someone's built that full universe and they're thinking about rebranding. Yeah. How do they execute a rebrand without losing traction or their existing customers?
Very carefully. This is a great question too. And the rebrands, they have a different set of challenges when we work on them with clients. Typically, the biggest thing that you have to get over is you're gonna feel for a time as if you have one foot in each world, one foot in the old brand world and one foot in the new brand world. So the first bit of advice I'm gonna give you is think about why you're rebranding. Right? There's a difference between just refreshing your visual identity just to kind of keep up and move with the times. That's different from a rebrand. A rebrand has a very specific strategic goal associated with it. Maybe you're trying to appeal to a new market, or maybe you fundamentally have changed your product or service in a way that warrants you doing a rebrand, right? So I think it's very important to be clear on what the objective of that rebrand is, right? And then educate, educate, educate. Let your customer base know before and after you rebrand, so that way they become accustomed, they're expecting it, and you can even invite them along for the journey. Make them part of that rebrand.
That's great. Yes. Love the idea of bringing people along for the ride. So we have a lot of people on today whose businesses kind of focus on them. They are the business, right? Whether they're a coach or provide a different kind of service. And how would you recommend they balance authenticity and personal storytelling with a strategic brand?
Great question. So the principles of what I'm talking about today apply whether you have a company brand or you are the brand. So in these cases where you might be a service provider or a consultant, if there's not a company attached to it, you are the brand, right? It still applies. So I think if many of you are probably on LinkedIn, you can hear the strongest voices are the people that have the biggest opinions, right?
Mhm.
Now, I'm not suggesting that you go out there and you become this, insufferable personality, just kind of talking out of one side of your mouth in a way that you haven't done the research to actually be able to back up. But at the same time, I think there is a way for you to project a strong point of view that still isn't slinging platitudes, right? But that also doesn't need to be so polarizing, right? Like the amount of polarizing you want to be really depends on the person and the category and how you go about it, right? And I know that is a very nuanced answer. Honestly, it's a very nuanced strategy. So it's one that you have to make sense with. What are you trying to accomplish with that point of view, right? How are you inviting people along? Because there are certainly categories that need very polarizing points of view, especially from leaders who are at the forefront of trying to make change, right? In my podcast, by the way, I just spoke to somebody who is not only a complete badass, but she is somebody with a very polarizing point of view. Her name is Cindy Gallup. And she is a self-professed, she is the Michael Bay of the business world in that she likes to blow shit up. So that is a perfect example of somebody who has the audacity and frankly is beloved by people because she is not afraid to talk about her point of view.
That's great. And Cindy Gallup is an amazing example. Let's see. So we have people on who have, I guess, a couple different audiences. And so if one of those audiences or primary customer is a wholesale partner, are there different considerations when brand building for that customer?
Great question. So when building the brand, it is different than when you're trying to build for, let's say, your B2B partners or like the actual sort of commercial logistics of everybody anywhere who's going to be part of your audience, right? You want to build, instead of thinking of building your brand around a demographic, you want to think about building your brand around a psychographic. So the idea is to make it a bigger point of view that will speak to multiple people within your audience, not just your customer base, right? So that should be part of your strategy, is asking yourself, how would our B2B partners, how would our wholesale customers feel about this too, right? Is this still attracting that same mindset of who we want to build our brand for? So I tend to think that a lot of times when I get this question, people still don't quite get the point that the idea is a bigger idea, right? It's not about the product. It's anchored in the product, but it's a bigger idea that sits above the rational or the emotional benefits of what that product does for you. Does that make sense? So theoretically, if you land on the right thing, it should speak to all your audiences.
Ah, that's great. Okay, let's see. Another question here. What do you recommend brands do when they make a misstep, and how can they bounce back if they do, in fact, alienate the customer that they need?
Yes. So unpopular opinion here, or I don't know if it is an unpopular opinion, but if I'm looking at two examples of this, so the first one being Anheuser-Busch, right? Anheuser-Busch, you know, it was not a good look for them, right? But what did they do? They came out and they apologized, right? Now, I think in that case, it made sense for them to apologize. Yeah. I don't know that you know, they still had the fallout that they did, but in my opinion, it could have been much worse had they not apologized.
Oh,
Now,
Robyn, really quickly,
yeah,
can
yes.
you just
Explain? Yes.
context? Yes, I think I
Yeah.
know what you're talking about, but just for everyone on.
So Anheuser-Busch had this, you know, relatively small campaign with an influencer that was not a cute look. It sort of, you know, it seemed to almost sort of poke fun at women, like they didn't understand sports. I can't remember. It was Dylan Mulvaney, I think was the name of the influencer. And she was dressed up and speaking to, you know, not really being familiar with football or something to that effect, right? And it really came across not great, just not a good look for Anheuser-Busch. And they came out and they apologized for it. And I think that was the right move. Now, with Apple recently put out an ad where they were using a sort of commercial, I forget the actual term for it, but it like kind of smashes together. I've been seeing these things all over TikTok too, but it was sort of smashing together a lot of these, what would be considered sort of traditional instruments and paint and, you know, a piano and what have you, right? And the backlash from this commercial was not great, again, to their core audience who are creatives. Now, what I think is interesting is Apple, again, as a corporation, as they do, they came out and apologized for the ad. I think that was a wrong move because Apple is about being creative, right? Think different. Their audience is creative. And I think of creatives, people should understand, their audience should understand that when you create art, it's not going to land every time, right? And Apple is the kind of sort of innovative company that if Steve Jobs, in my opinion, were still alive today, they would have had a very different response. They would have sat in that integrity and they would have owned it, right? So this is why I make the point about your point of view needs to be something that you can comfortably argue your side of, right? Mm-hmm. And you need to be comfortable with the fact that people are going to disagree with you. And I think as long as you can accept the implications of having a point of view, yeah, you may lose some customers, but again, you will gain the integrity and the love from others who see that you are steeped in that integrity. Does that make sense? I hope that illustrates the principle for you there.
Yes, especially the Apple example. That's a great one. Thank you. And so I think we have time for one last one. If a brand has multiple aspects that sets it apart from others in the industry, how do they choose which to stand on? We had someone who did the pick a fight exercise and found that they had three answers.
Good question. So I think there's a few different ways to address this, which is one is a positioning standpoint. Which one gives you the strongest positioning of the rest of your category? So you want to ask yourself, okay, if this is an aspect of the category that others could quickly change, that might not be the best one to focus on, right? Others are, is it an interesting point of view? You know, is it an interesting aspect that you can turn into a point of view? Does it give you some fertile territory to come up with content and campaigns? Like if you're immediately thinking of, oh yeah, I could do this and this and this, I could do this Instagram post and this blog post, and I could talk to this influence, right? The idea is that you want something that gives you fertile territory. So if you're struggling to come up with some of those ideas, might not be the right angle, right? So you want to find the aspect that gives you the most creative freedom and the most room to make it something ownable. Yeah.
Great. And thank you for ending us on that nugget. We really appreciate your sharing your expertise with our community. And just as a reminder, everyone, we will be sharing the recording, so check your inboxes. And